Opisthocoelicaudia. Opisthocoelicaudia/Opisthocoelicaudia is a genus of sauropod dinosaur of the late Cretaceous period discovered in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia. The type species is Opisthocoelicaudia skarzinski. A well-preserved skeleton lacking only the head and neck was unearthed in 1965 by Polish and Mongolian scientists, making Opisthocoelicaudia one of the best-known sauropods from the late Cretaceous. Tooth marks on this skeleton indicate that large carnivorous dinosaurs had fed on the carcass and possibly had carried away the now missing parts. To date, only 2 additional, much less complete specimens are known, including part of a shoulder and a fragmentary tail. A relatively small sauropod, Opisthocoelicaudia measured about 11.4 to 13 meters, 37 to 43 feet, in length. Like other sauropods, it would have been characterized by a small head sitting on a very long neck and a barrel-shaped trunk carried by 4 column-like legs. The name Opisthocoelicaudia means posterior cavity tail, alluding to the unusual, opisthocoel condition of the anterior tail vertebrae that were concave on their posterior sides. This and other skeletal features lead researchers to propose that Opisthocoelicaudia was able to rear on its hind legs. Named and described by Polish paleontologist Maria Magdalena Borsuk-Białownicka in 1977, Opisthocoelicaudia was first thought to be a new member of the Camarasauridae, but is currently considered a derived member of the Titanosauria. Its exact relationships within Titanosauria are contentious, but it may have been close to the North American Alamosaurus. All Opisthocoelicaudia fossils stem from the Nemegt Formation. Despite being rich in dinosaur fossils, the only other sauropod from this rock unit is Neoceratopsians, which is known from a single skull. Since the skull of Opisthocoelicaudia remains unknown, several researchers have suggested that Neoceratopsians and Opisthocoelicaudia may represent the same species. Sauropod footprints from the Nemegt Formation, which include skin impressions, can probably be referred to either Neoceratopsians or Opisthocoelicaudia, as these are the only known sauropods from this formation. Discovery and specimens. The type specimen was discovered between June 10 and 23, 1965, during a joint Polish-Mongolian paleontological expedition led by Polish paleontologist Zofia Kielin-Jaworowska. The largest of a series of expeditions carried out in 1963 to 1971, this expedition involved 21 members, which at times were supported by additional hired Mongolian workers. The site of discovery is located in Umnagavi province in southern Mongolia in the Altanil area, which exposes some 100 square kilometers of badlands. The sediments exposed at Altanil belong to the Nemegt Formation, the youngest of the 3 geological formations of the Nemegt Basin. Opisthocoelicaudia was the first of several important dinosaur discoveries made by the 1965 expedition. The other finds, made at different localities, include several skeletons of the Tyrannosaurid Tarbosaurus as well as the type specimens of the giant ornithomimosaur Dinosaurus, the sauropod Neoceratopsians, and the Pachycephalus or Homalocephal. On the 5th day of fieldwork, Ryszard Gradzinski, the geologist of the expedition, found a concretion of well-preserved bones which promised to belong to a fairly complete skeleton. Excavation starting the next day revealed a nearly complete skeleton lacking only the head and neck. Until today, this specimen remains by far the most complete finding of this dinosaur. The transport of the specimen out of rough terrain caused major technical problems. Stone blocks containing the fossils had to be moved some 580 meters, dragged on improvised metal sledges made out of petrol drums, before they could be loaded onto trucks. Because the skeleton was embedded in very hard sandstone layers, several blocks weighed over a ton. On July 9, the packing of the skeleton into 35 crates started for transportation to Dalanzajid. Together, the crates weighed about 12 tons. The type specimen belonged to an aged individual. Its taphonomy is unusual as it was found lying on its back. In contrast, most other nearly complete dinosaur skeletons of the Nemegt Formation usually are found lying on their sides. The specimen was found encased in cross-bedded sandstone deposited by a river. Most of the discovered vertebrae were still connected together, forming a continuous series of 8 dorsal, 6 sacral and 34 caudal vertebrae. An additional 3 vertebrae were found isolated from the series and may belong to the transitional area between back and neck. The remaining parts of the skeleton were shifted slightly out of their original anatomical position. Both the left limb and rib bones were found on the right side of the body, while conversely the right limb and rib bones were found on the left side. Bite marks have been identified on the skeleton, particularly in the pelvis and the thigh bone, showing that predators had fed on the carcass. The skull and neck are missing, indicating that the carnivores might have carried away these body parts. The completeness of the remains indicate that the individual had died near the discovery site. A flooding event might have transported the carcass a short distance and subsequently covered it with sediment, even before the soft tissue had decayed entirely. In 1977, Polish paleontologist Maria Magdalena Borsuk-Białowicza published her comprehensive description of the skeleton and named Opisthocoelicaudia skarzyńska as a new genus and species. The genus name, hinting at the unusual opisthocoel condition of the tail vertebrae, means posterior cavity tail. It is derived from the Greek pi iota sigma theta epsilon nu, opisthon, kappa omicron lambda omicron sigma, coelos, and Latin cauda. The specific name honors Wojciech Skarżyński, the person who prepared the type specimen. Opisthocoelicaudia was only the third sauropod formation known from a postcranial skeleton, after Euhalopus and Mamenchisaurus. After its discovery, the holotype skeleton became part of the collection of the Institute of Paleobiology in Warsaw, but later was handed back to its country of origin, now being housed at the Institute of Geology of the Mongolian Academy of Sciences in Ulaanbaatar under the catalogue number MPCD 100/404. Besides the type specimen, Borsuk-Białowicza described a shoulder blade and coracoid, SPLMGDI/25C, from the same locality. These bones were not yet fused to each other, indicating a juvenile individual. By 2017, sauropod fossils had been recovered from a total of 32 localities within the Nemegt Formation, and possibly belong to either Opisthocoelicaudia or Nemegtosaurus. At least two finds from the Nemegt locality, a fragmentary tail, MPD 100-406, and a pair of claws, show features diagnostic for Opisthocoelicaudia and can be referred to the latter. Field crews led by Philip Currie attempted to relocate the Opisthocoelicaudia holotype quarry in 2006 and 2008. But became successful only in 2009 thanks to additional data provided by Gradzinski. Although a prospection for additional bone material was not possible as the quarry had been filled by wind-blown sand, the quarry could be determined to fall within the lower portion of the Nemegt Formation. Description: like other sauropods, Opisthocoelicaudia had a small head on a long neck, a barrel-shaped body on 4 columnar limbs, and a long tail. It was relatively small for a sauropod. The type specimen was estimated at 11.4 meters, 37 feet, to 13 meters, 43 feet, from the head to the tip of the tail. The body mass has been estimated at 8.4 t, 19,000 pounds, 10.5 t, 23,000 pounds, 22 t, 49,000 pounds, 13 t, 29,000 pounds, and 25.4 t, 56,000 pounds, in separate studies. The skull and neck are not preserved, but the reconstruction of the nuchal ligament indicates the possession of a neck of medium length of roughly 5 meters, 16 feet. Borsuk-Białowicza, in her 1977 description, noted the presence of 11 dorsal vertebrae. Gregory Paul in 2019, however, argued that the known part of the vertebral column actually includes the first cervical, neck vertebra, leaving only 10 dorsals, typical of titanosaurs. As in other titanosaurs, the back was quite flexible due to the lack of accessory vertebral joints, hypaspine and hypentrum articulations, while the pelvic region was strengthened by an additional 6th hip vertebra. The anterior vertebrae of the tail were apisochelous, which means they were convex on their anterior sides and concave on their back sides, forming ball and socket joints. These apisochelous tail vertebrae lend Opisthocoelicaudia its name and serve to distinguish the genus from all other titanosaurs. Other titanosaurs were usually characterized by a strongly procolous anterior tail vertebrae, which were concave on their anterior sides and convex on their back sides. Another unique feature can be found in the back vertebrae, which show bifurcated spinous processes, resulting in a double row of bony projections along the top of the spine. While unique in titanosaurs, this feature can be found in several other unrelated sauropods, including Diplodocus and Euhalopus, where it evolved independently. As in the hips of other titanosaurs, the ischium was relatively short, measuring only 2/3 the length of the pubis. The left and right ischium bones as well as the left and right pubis bones were ossified with each other over most of their length, closing the gap that in other sauropods is normally present between these bones. The limbs were proportionally short, as seen in other titanosaurs. The forelimbs measured 1.87 meters, 6.1 feet, in height in the nearly complete specimen, approximately 2/3 the length of the hindlimbs, which were reconstructed at 2.46 meters, 8.1 feet, height. As in other titanosaurs, the limbs were slightly spread outwards rather than standing vertically under the body, while the forelimbs were more flexible and mobile compared to other sauropods. The manus was composed merely of the 5 metacarpalia, which were orientated vertically and arranged in a semicircle. Carpal bones were missing, as in other titanosaurs. Finger bones and claws were also completely absent. In most other titanosaurs, these bones were still present though extremely reduced in size. In the foot, the talus bone was strongly reduced as in other titanosaurs, while the calcaneus was probably completely absent in Opisthocoelicaudia. In contrast to the mantis, the foot showed well-developed digits and claws. The phalangeal formula, which states the number of phalanges, digit bones, beginning with the innermost digit, is 22210. Foot skeletons of titanosaurs are rarely found, and besides Opisthocoelicaudia, completely preserved examples are known only from Opisthosaurus and the unnamed lion Bernata titanosaur, whose phalangeal formulas are 22320 and 22220, respectively. Of these three titanosaurs, Opisthocoelicaudia was the most derived while showing the fewest phalanges, indicating a progressive reduction in the phalangeal count during titanosaur evolution. The claw of the first digit was not larger than that of the second digit, as in other sauropods, but roughly equal in size. Osteoderms, bony plates formed in the skin, have been found with at least 10 titanosaur genera. The lack of osteoderms in the nearly complete Opisthocoelicaudia skeleton might indicate they are absent in this genus. However, the closely related Alamosaurus was found to have osteoderms nearly a century after its discovery, in addition to several other closely related titanosaurs, thus raising the possibility that Opisthocoelicaudia had them as well. Classification. Originally, Opisthocoelicaudia was classified as a member of the family Camarasauridae, together with Camarasaurus and Euhelopus. This classification was based on several shared features of the skeleton, most importantly the forked neural spines of the back vertebrae. In 1977, Borsuk Biawindica considered Opisthocoelicaudia closer to Euhelopus than to Camarasaurus, placing it in the subfamily Eulopodinae. In 1981 study by Walter Kumpf and Ralph Molnar, on the other hand, considered it a member of the subfamily Camarasaurinae and therefore a close relative of Camarasaurus. Today, both Euhelopus and Opisthocoelicaudia are classified outside the Camarasauridae. In 1993, Leonardo Salgado and Rodolfo Coria showed Opisthocoelicaudia to represent a titanosaur and classified it within the family Titanosauridae. The name Titanosauridae is currently considered invalid by many scientists. Instead, the name Lithostrotia is often used as an equivalent. Within the Lithostrotia, Opisthocoelicaudia has been found to be closely related to the genera Alamosaurus, Nerconsaurus, Rhocosaurus, and Saltosaurus, together forming the family Saltosauridae. Interrelationships of these genera are contested. Many scientists considered Opisthocoelicaudia to be most closely related to Alamosaurus, with both genera forming a monophyletic group, the Opisthocoelicaudiinae. Other scientists concluded that the Opisthocoelicaudiinae is paraphyletic, not forming a natural group. Contradicting most other studies, Upchurch and colleagues in 2004 argued that Alamosaurus has to be placed outside the Saltosauridae as a close relative of Pellegrinosaurus, and therefore is not related to Opisthocoelicaudia at all. This cladogram, based on Calvo and colleagues, 2007, shows a monophyletic Opisthocoelicaudiinae. Relationship to Neoceratopsians. Another sauropod of the Neoceratopsian formation, Neoceratopsaurus, is known only from a skull. Opisthocoelicaudia, on the other hand, lacks both the skull and neck, precluding a direct comparison and leading to suspicions that it may represent a synonym of Neoceratopsaurus. According to the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, ICZN, the oldest name has priority over younger synonyms. If Opisthocoelicaudia would be shown to be a synonym of Neoceratopsaurus, the name Neoceratopsaurus would remain valid while Opisthocoelicaudia would become invalid. Both Opisthocoelicaudia and Neoceratopsaurus were discovered during the 1965 joint Polish-Mongolian expedition. Before the remains were prepared and described, the expedition crew believed both finds to belong to the same species of sauropod. In 1977, Borsuk Biawindica deemed Opisthocoelicaudia and Neoceratopsaurus to represent separate genera because Neoceratopsaurus was at this time considered to be a member of the Dicreusauridae, while Opisthocoelicaudia seemed to be a representative of a different group, the Camarasauridae. Currently, both Opisthocoelicaudia and Neoceratopsaurus are classified within the Titanosauria, and Jeffrey Wilson stated in 2005 that synonymy cannot be ruled out. Curry and colleagues, in 2003 and 2017, argued that a synonymy is very probable in the light of new fossil discoveries in the Neoceratopsian formation. After relocating the original Neoceratopsaurus quarry, these researchers excavated postcranial bones of the Neoceratopsaurus holotype including the centrum of a caudal vertebra and hind limb bones, which allowed For the first time, a direct comparison between the Neoceratopsians and Opisthocoelicaudia type specimens based on overlapping elements. These postcranial elements were found to be very similar to the corresponding parts of the Opisthocoelicaudia holotype. Most importantly, the discovered caudal centrum is Opisthocoelis, a diagnostic feature of Opisthocoelicaudia, suggesting both genera were either closely related or synonymous. Furthermore, these authors noted that none of the 32 known sauropod localities of the Neoceratopsian formation revealed evidence for the presence of more than one species of sauropod. In 2019, Alexander Oavrianov and Alexei Vielopatin reported Neoceratopsian sauropod vertebrae discovered in 1949 and some femura that differed from the same bones of Opisthocoelicaudia, and stated they probably belonged to Neoceratopsaurus, thereby supporting that the two genera were distinct. In her 1977 description, Ziqi Bai argued that different sauropod genera sharing the same habitat is nothing unusual, as is evident in the North American Morrison Formation. Curry and colleagues, however, stressed in 2018 that the dinosaur fauna of the Neoceratopsian Formation was fundamentally different, as larger dinosaurs were present with only few species per clade, indicating a harsh and geographically restricted habitat. Definitive proof for the suggested synonymy is, however, still missing, and additional overlapping elements would be required before Opisthocoelicaudia and Neoceratopsaurus can be formally declared synonyms. Paleobiology. Posture. Originally, Ziqi Bai assumed that in standard position the neck was horizontal or slanted slightly downward. This was based on the reconstruction of the nuchal ligament, which runs atop of the cervical and dorsal vertebrae and serves to support the weight of the head and neck. Although an S-curved, swan-like ascending neck was envisaged in several subsequent reconstructions following similar depictions of better-known sauropods, recent studies argue that sauropod necks were relatively straight and were carried more horizontally. The back was also reconstructed in a more or less horizontal orientation by Ziqi Bai, which was followed by most subsequent depictions. In a 2007 study, Daniela Schwartz and colleagues suggested that the back dipped towards the rear. According to these researchers, the shoulder blade would have been inclined at a horizontal angle of 55 to 65 degrees, much steeper than previously thought, resulting in an elevated shoulder region. With the vertebral column of the trunk and neck held in a relatively straight line, this would result in an elevated position of the head. Rearing stance. Opisthocoelicaudia may have been able to rear up on its hind limbs for foraging, using its tail as a third leg. In 1977, Ziqi Bai cited several skeletal features that might have been related to rearing, including the Opisthocoelis vertebrae of the anterior part of the tail, which, according to this author, would have made the tail more flexible than in other sauropods. Features of the pelvis, such as the thickened shelf of the acetabulum, the flaring ilia, and the fused pubic symphysis, may have allowed the pelvis to withstand the stress of rearing. Heinrich Mallison in 2011 argued that Opisthocoelicaudia may have been able to angle the anterior part of the tail against the posterior part, producing a buckle in midsection. Thus, the anterior part would have been more straight during rearing than in other sauropods. In 2005, Wilson assumed that rearing was an innovation not only of Opisthocoelicaudia but also of related genera within the subfamily Saltasaurinae. Common features of these genera, such as the shortened tail, may have evolved as adaptations to rearing. Footprints. Footprints from the Neoceratopsian formation were unknown until 2003, when several examples had been described from the Neoceratopsian locality by Curry and colleagues. Most of these footprints belonged to hadrosaurids, probably Saurolophus, while two have been left by a large theropod, probably Tarbosaurus, and yet another two by the hindfoot of a sauropod. The sauropod tracks were assigned to Opisthocoelicaudia, which, according to these authors, showed a matching hindfoot morphology and was probably the only known sauropod, and, thus, the only potential trackmaker species, from the Neoceratopsian formation when Neoceratopsaurus is regarded a synonym. The tracks were left in the soft and wet mud of shallow or freshly dried up points along a river and subsequently filled up with sand. Today only the sand infill remains, with the encasing mudstone having been eroded away. The best preserved footprint measures 63 centimeters, 25 in, across, so it was probably created by an individual larger than the type specimen. Although the surface of the underside is hard to obtain, the vertical surfaces are very well preserved, making this track one of the best preserved sauropod tracks known. 4 digital impressions can be distinguished, with 2 or 3 showing claw impressions. The toes were almost perpendicular. Even a skin impression has been preserved above the impression of the first toe, which shows the non-overlapping scales, each with an average diameter of 14 mm, 0.55 in. The foot of the track creator was probably a little longer than wide. The second track is much shallower than the first, but shows well-preserved digit impressions with a high degree of detail, including at least 2 deep claw impressions that are rotated outwards, and a well-preserved impression of a fleshy toe pad behind the middle claw. Although a number of additional sauropod tracks were reported in subsequent accounts, they continue to be rare in relation to the much more common hadrosaurid and theropod tracks. Brennan Stetner and colleagues, in 2017, reported on footprints discovered during a 2007 expedition to the Nemegt locality. The best preserved of these, a very large, 76 cm, 30 in, long impression of a hindfoot, features a very well-preserved underside showing digital pads and 4 outwards directed digits, the first 3 of which showing claws. Also in 2017, Judai Nakajima and colleagues described a kidney-shaped impression as the first sauropod manus, 4-foot, impression discovered in the formation. Paleo Ecology. The Nemegt Formation was deposited within the late Cretaceous, although its exact age is unknown as it has never been dated radiometrically. According to different authors, the formation is late Campanian to early Maastrichtian, or middle Maastrichtian in age. The sediments of the Nemegt Formation were deposited in a plain crossed by rivers. The climate was warm and subhumid with seasonal droughts, and the soils were relatively dry. Nevertheless, the Nemegt Formation was more humid than the underlying, and thus older, Barungayo and Jadakta formations, which show a semi-arid climate. The fauna of the Nemegt Formation includes aquatic or amphibious animals such as fish, turtles, and crocodiles as well as birds and the abundant medium to large-sized dinosaurs, while smaller terrestrial vertebrates like lizards and mammals are rare. Theropod dinosaurs are very diverse in the Nemegt and include the abundant Tyrannosaur Tarbosaurus, which might have preyed upon Opisthocoelicaudia. The only other known sauropod is Nemegtosaurus, which is known from a single skull. Ornithischians are represented by the duck-billed hadrosaurids, including the very common Saurolophus, the thick-skulled Pachycephalosaurs, and the heavily armored Ankylosaurs. Neoceratopsians are absent, despite being present in the older Barungayo and Jadakta formations. Other important dinosaur finds from the same locality as Opisthocoelicaudia include the troodontid Borogovia and the Ankylosaurid Tarchia.